The endless empire. The galaxy had known fear for thousands of years, but no fear compared to the Zarkathi Dominion. They were not just an empire, they were a storm, a shadow stretching from one end of the stars to the other. Wherever their fleets arrived, the skies turned black with their battleships. Worlds surrendered before the first shot was even fired. Civilizations that had stood for millennia fell in a matter of days. To the Zarkathi, conquest was not war. It was routine, like breathing. Their fleets were so large that alien scholars once described them as a moving galaxy within the galaxy. Each fleet carried thousands of warships, each warship capable of breaking planets apart. Resistance was considered foolish because no one had ever stopped them. The Zarkathi fed on pride. Their commanders wore armor decorated with fragments of enemy vessels. They told stories of how easily species had begged for mercy. To them, fear was as powerful as their weapons, and soon they believed all of existence would kneel. But among the stars, there was one region the Dominion had not yet touched. It was a small cluster of systems, insignificant compared to their empire. It was known simply as human space. Most alien races ignored it. Some whispered rumors about it, stories of a people who had fought wars that destroyed entire continents, a people who did not break even when facing extinction. The Zarkathi laughed at these tales. To them, humanity was just another prey waiting to be harvested. The high command of the Dominion gathered in a massive war council aboard their flagship. Eternal Blade. Thousands of commanders, admirals, and warlords filled the chamber. A map of the galaxy hovered in the air, glowing like fire. One corner remained unmarked, the sector of humanity. A senior warlord stood. His voice boomed across the chamber. Brothers and sisters, we have conquered galaxies without effort. We have bent empires to our knees. Only one corner remains unclaimed. The humans believe they are safe. Let us show them the truth of the Dominion. The chamber roared with agreement. It was not a debate. It was a declaration. The invasion of human space was no longer a question. It was destiny. But there was a strange silence after the cheers. For a brief moment, the warlords hesitated. They had all heard whispers of one strange thing, not of humanity itself, but of a ship, a single human warship that patrolled the dark edge of their sector. No one knew its name. Some called it the Ghost. Others said it was a relic from humanity's ancient wars. According to rumors, it had appeared before entire fleets and forced them to retreat. The warlords dismissed these tales as myths, stories told by cowards. How could one ship, a lone vessel, stop the might of the Zarkathi? Impossible. Laughable. The order was given. Thousands of warships were prepared. Dreadnoughts, carriers, swarms of destroyers, all gathered like a tidal wave. Their engines lit up the void. Their weapons hummed with power. They marched through space like predators on the hunt. To the Zarkathi, this was already over. They spoke of the humans in past tense, as if their defeat had already been written. Yet in the silence of the stars, something waited. On the edge of human space, hidden in the black, a single ship rested. Its hull was scarred, its armor dark, almost lifeless. For years it had drifted in silence, as if asleep. But deep within, its systems pulsed with quiet energy. It was not dead. It was watching. The ship's sensors came alive. The invasion was coming. The Zarkathi were unaware, but their every movement was already tracked. And in the cold silence of the command deck, a human voice whispered into the darkness, "Let them come." The Endless Empire believed no one could stop them. But for the first time in their long reign of conquest, they were walking into something unknown. They were about to face not just a warship, but the will of a species that had survived its own nightmares, a species that would never surrender. And so, the story began, not with the fall of humanity, but with the first tremor in the Dominion's endless march. A tremor caused not by fleets, not by empires, but by one human warship waiting in the dark. The human warship awakens. The Zarkathi fleet entered human space with pride and confidence. Their ships spread across the stars like a storm cloud, covering entire systems with their presence. To them this was routine. They had done it 1,000 times before. Push forward, crush resistance, enslave survivors. Admiral Vorthak, one of the most ruthless leaders of the Dominion, stood on the bridge of his dreadnought. His red eyes scanned the darkness ahead, searching for signs of human defense. He saw nothing. No fleets, no satellites, no stations. Only silence. Pathetic, he muttered. These humans hide like insects. But his sensors officer hesitated. On the display, far ahead in the void, a single signal appeared. It was small, weak, almost lifeless. The officer leaned forward, his spines stiff with unease. "Admiral, there is something out there. One vessel." The bridge filled with laughter. Commanders mocked the sight. "One vessel? This is their defense? A broken ship against a fleet of thousands? End this quickly." The order was given. Zarkathi. Destroyers moved ahead, their weapons hot and ready. They approached the lone object in the dark, eager to erase it. But as they drew closer, something strange happened. The ship was not drifting like debris. It was waiting. Its shape was long, angular, built not for beauty but for survival. Scars from old battles marked its surface. At first it looked like a derelict, a relic from a forgotten war. Then its lights came alive. The hull glowed with power. Its engines flared like stars igniting after endless night. Systems powered up in sequence, each awakening with a low hum that echoed across the void. The old warship was not dead. It was waking up. The Zarkathi destroyers slowed. A voice cut through their channels, sharp and clear. It was human. "Turn back now. Leave this sector, or you will not leave at all." For a moment, silence hung across the fleet. Then came the laughter again. The Zarkathi did not fear. They had faced thousands of enemies, millions of ships. What was one voice against the Dominion? Admiral Vorthak snarled. "Destroy it! Show them what happens when insects challenge giants." The first destroyer launched a volley of plasma torpedoes. Bright blue fire shot across space, striking the warship. Explosions tore across its armor, smoke and fire bursting into the void. The bridge of the Dominion roared with victory, but as the smoke cleared, the warship still stood. Its shield shimmered, cracked but unbroken. Slowly, its massive cannons turned toward the destroyer. The weapons locked, targeting systems chirped, and then the human ship fired. A single beam of energy cut through the void like a blade of light. It sliced through the destroyer's shields, through its armor, and out the other side. In one shot, the ship was gone, shredded into fragments. The Zarkathi fleet went silent. On the human warship's command deck, Captain Arik Dane stood tall. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp and calm. He had commanded this ship for years, waiting for this very day. He whispered quietly to his crew, "Remember what we stand for. Not one invader passes through." The crew nodded. Every man and woman on board knew the truth. They were outnumbered, but not outwilled. This was humanity's last line. More Zarkathi ships charged, their weapons filling the stars with fire. But the human warship moved with impossible precision. It rolled, dived, twisted between beams. Its cannons spat death. Its missiles chased enemies through the dark, and one by one, the destroyers fell. Fear began to creep into the Zarkathi. For the first time in their long empire, they hesitated. The stories they had mocked, the legends they had dismissed. Now they were seeing them with their own eyes. Admiral Vorthak slammed his clawed fist against the command rail. "This is nothing but a machine. Overwhelm it. Drown it in fire." Yet no matter how many came, no matter how heavy the storm of weapons, The warship endured. It was not just a ship. It was a symbol, a ghost of humanity's endless wars, carrying the spirit of a people who refused to die. By the time the first battle ended, dozens of Zarkathi ships were gone, reduced to burning wrecks drifting through the void. The lone warship floated through the wreckage like a predator among corpses. Its hull burned, its shields flickered, but it still lived. The message was clear. The Zarkathi Dominion had conquered galaxies with ease, but now they had awakened something different. A force that could not be measured in numbers, a weapon built, not from arrogance, but from survival. And as the human warship turned slowly toward the heart of the enemy fleet, its weapons glowing brighter, a single thought spread through the Dominion's ranks like a shadow. What if one ship was enough to stop them all? The first clash, the stars burned red with fire. Debris from shattered Zarkathi destroyers floated across the void like broken bones of giants. The silence of space was broken only by the crackle of dying engines and the fading screams of commanders who had once believed themselves invincible. The lone human warship drifted forward through the wreckage. Its hull glowed faintly with battle damage, but its weapons still hummed with deadly power. Inside, Captain Arik Dane stood steady on the command deck, his eyes locked on the swarm of enemy signals still flooding the radar. "They're regrouping," his first officer reported, her voice tight with tension. Arik nodded. "Let them. They'll come harder now, and we'll show them harder still." Across the battlefield, Admiral Vorthak's massive dreadnought bristled with fury. The alien commander's claws dug into the command rail as he stared at the destruction his fleet had suffered. He had lost dozens of ships, destroyers and cruisers that should have crushed a lone vessel like insects. "This is impossible," one of his lieutenants hissed. "No single ship can do this." Vorthak's eyes burned with rage. "It is only a machine. And machines break. Ready the assault wings. We drown it in numbers." Orders echoed across the fleet. Hundreds of fighters launched from Zarkathi carriers, their wings spreading like black locusts in the void. Behind them, heavy cruisers moved into formation, preparing to unleash a storm of firepower. The human warship detected the movement instantly. Alarms filled the command deck. "They're coming in waves," the sensor officer said, her hands flying across the controls. Arik's voice was calm. "Steady. We've faced worse." The fighters swarmed first. Small, fast, and vicious, they darted around the human vessel, firing plasma bolts and trying to overwhelm its shields. For a moment, the warship disappeared behind a storm of energy fire. The Zarkathi roared in triumph, believing the end was near, but the ship fought back. Its point defense cannons spun to life, glowing barrels tearing into the swarm. Dozens of fighters exploded in brilliant flashes. The warship rolled and banked, its engines roaring as it moved with a grace that seemed impossible for a vessel of its size. Missiles launched from hidden bays, streaking through the dark to hunt down targets. Each detonation ripped holes through the swarm. Inside the ship, the crew worked as one. Commands were shouted, screens flickered, hands moved with practiced speed. They were not just soldiers. They were survivors, bound together by years of training and the unspoken knowledge that failure meant the end of everything behind them. Still, the Zarkathi pressed harder. Their cruisers opened fire, massive beams of plasma slashing across space. The warship shuddered as its shields took hit after hit. Lights flickered, metal groaned, and alarms screamed warnings. "Shields at 60%! A technician called out. Arik's jaw tightened. "Divert power from secondary weapons. Keep us alive." The battle turned into chaos. The human vessel darted between enemy cruisers, trading fire at close range. Every shot had to count. A single beam from the warship's main cannon split a cruiser in two, sending its remains tumbling into a nearby carrier. Explosions chained across the enemy line, momentarily breaking their formation. But the cost was heavy. The warship's armor peeled away in sections. Fires raged on lower decks. Every hit it took was another reminder that the Zarkathi were endless. Their numbers too vast. Admiral Vorthak grinned, his fangs flashing. "It bleeds. See, it cannot last forever." Yet beneath his words was a crack of doubt. For every loss the warship suffered, the Zarkathi had lost tenfold. Their fighters were thinning, their cruisers burned, and the impossible legend refused to fall. In the middle of the battle, something unexpected happened. The human warship cut power for a moment, drifting like a corpse. The Zarkathi swarmed in, eager to finish it. Then, the warship's engines roared to life again. Hidden weapon ports opened across its hull. From the shadows of silence, it unleashed a storm of projectiles, unlike anything the Zarkathi had seen. Railguns fired at impossible speed, their rounds smashing through shields like glass. Energy pulses lanced outward in every direction, carving holes into the swarm. It was a trap, perfectly timed. The warship had feigned weakness, drawing the enemy close before unleashing its fury. Entire squadrons were erased in seconds. The Zarkathi bridge erupted with chaos. Officers shouted, commanders screamed. Admiral Vorthak's claws dug so deep into the rail that sparks flew. For the first time in his long reign, he felt a word he had never spoken before: fear. The human ship emerged from the fire, scarred but unbroken. Its lights glowed brighter, its weapons ready for more. On the command deck, Captain Arik whispered to his crew, "This is only the beginning. They think they fight a machine, but what they face is the will of humanity itself." The battle raged on, but the first clash had already told the truth. The endless empire had found its first wall, and it was not crumbling. It was fighting back, and as the smoke drifted across the stars, both sides knew the same thing. This war would not be easy. This war would change everything. The ghost of humanity's wars, the battlefield was littered with burning wreckage. Pieces of Zarkathi fighters spun aimlessly, colliding with fragments of shattered cruisers. The stars flickered behind the smoke, as if the galaxy itself was watching in silence. The lone human warship drifted through the chaos, scarred but alive. Its engines pulsed softly, like the heartbeat of a predator that had just survived the hunt. On its command deck, Captain Arik Dane stood tall, though fatigue pressed against his shoulders. His crew worked in silence, each one knowing the truth. They had done the impossible. But the battle was far from over. Across the void, the Zarkathi fleet regrouped. Their dreadnought, the Eternal Blade, still loomed like a black mountain of fire. On its bridge, Admiral Vorthak snarled, his claws leaving fresh grooves in the metal railing. "This is no ordinary vessel," one of his tacticians said, trembling as he replayed battle footage. "Its weapons are ancient, its systems strange." "It is not just a ship, Admiral. It is something else." Vorthak's eyes narrowed. "Explain." The tactician displayed the data. Each weapon signature, each shield response, carried technology not seen anywhere in the galaxy. These were not the tools of expansion or conquest. These were weapons forged in desperation, born from a people who had once stood on the edge of extinction. "This ship is a ghost," the tactician whispered. "A ghost from humanity's wars." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, even the Admiral was silent. Inside the warship, Arik's crew gathered in the strategy room. The holographic table glowed with red markers, enemy ships still surrounding them. The odds were impossible. Yet Arik's eyes did not show fear. "We've bought ourselves time," he said quietly. "But they're learning. The Zarkathi will throw everything they have. They think numbers can crush us. They don't understand." One of his officers frowned. "Understand what, Captain?" Arik touched the hologram, and the display shifted. It no longer showed enemy ships. Instead, it showed Earth. Cities scarred by past wars, landscapes blackened by weapons that had once burned continents. "Humanity was born in fire," he said. "We nearly destroyed ourselves again and again. Nuclear fire, biological plagues, endless wars of pride. We faced extinction more times than we can count. But we survived. And when survival is your only teacher, you build weapons not to win battles, but to make sure you never die. The crew fell silent. They knew their history, but hearing it now felt different. They were not just fighting for survival. They were carrying the memory of every ancestor who had refused to bow. On the other side of space, the Zarkathi began to uncover fragments of that same truth. Their intelligence officers hacked into faint signals from the warship, intercepted old transmissions stored within its systems. What they found chilled them. Grainy recordings showed human wars centuries old. Battles where cities turned to ash in seconds, soldiers fighting in ruined streets, refusing to surrender even when hopeless. Entire fleets annihilated by desperate tactics, scorched earth strategies that destroyed both friend and foe, all to deny the enemy victory. The Zarkathi were conquerors, yes, but their wars had been easy. Civilizations bowed quickly, armies broke after one crushing defeat. They had never fought a species willing to burn everything just to deny submission. For the first time, the Dominion felt a shadow creeping over their pride. Back on the Eternal Blade, Admiral Vorthak slammed his fist against the hologram. They are only humans, flesh and bone. We are the Dominion. We have never been stopped. But his words rang hollow. He could see the fear in his officer's eyes. He could feel doubt gnawing at his own chest. If one ship carried such fury, what would a fleet of them mean? Still, arrogance was a poison he could not abandon. He spread his claws and barked his command. Summon reinforcements. 10 fleets. We crush this ghost and erase their memory from the stars. Inside the warship, Arik watched the enemy regroup. He knew what was coming. More ships, more fire, more blood. But he also knew something the Dominion did not. The warship itself was more than steel and firepower. It carried the voices of the past. Embedded in its systems were combat AIs built from centuries of data, each one shaped by humanity's darkest wars. Every maneuver, every weapon fired was guided by generations of survival written into code. It was not just his crew fighting. It was the memory of billions. As the lights of enemy reinforcements flickered into view on the edge of the radar, Arik's voice cut through the silence of his ship. They think they fight a relic. They think this is just one warship, but they are wrong. What they face is every war humanity has ever fought, carried here in us. The crew straightened. The engines roared. Weapons powered up once more. And in the darkness of space, the human warship turned its scarred hull toward the oncoming tide. A ghost born from humanity's endless wars was about to show the Dominion what true survival meant. The test of will. The darkness of space trembled with the arrival of new ships. One by one, Zarkathi reinforcements poured into human space. Their engines lit the void with red fire, until the stars themselves were drowned in the glow of their war machines. Admiral Vorthak stood tall on the bridge of the Eternal Blade. His chest rose with pride as the numbers grew. 10 full fleets, carriers, dreadnoughts, cruisers, and endless swarms of fighters. The Dominion's might was now gathered in one place. "No ghost will stop us now," he growled. "End this human trick." The Zarkathi crews roared in response, their voices echoing with confidence. To them, this was no longer a battle. It was a hunt, and they believed their prey was finally cornered. On the lone human warship, the atmosphere was different. The crew stared at their radar in silence. Thousands of red markers filled the screen, a tide of enemies larger than anything they had ever faced. The first officer broke the silence. "Captain, this is impossible. They'll crush us." Captain Arik Dane's eyes did not leave the screen. His voice was calm, steady, like stone. "No, they'll try. But we've faced the impossible before." The crew exchanged glances. They knew their captain was right. Humanity had always faced impossible odds, on Earth, against themselves, and now against an empire that thought itself eternal. The Dominion believed numbers were everything, but humanity had something else. will. The battle began with thunder. The Zarkathi unleashed their full force. Thousands of fighters swarmed ahead, plasma beams cut across the darkness, and heavy torpedoes streaked toward the warship. The void itself seemed to scream under the weight of fire. The human warship moved like a shadow. Its engines flared, weaving between barrages that should have torn it apart. Point defense cannons spun and roared, filling the void with burning. Wrecks of enemy fighters. Missiles darted out, chasing their targets with deadly precision. Still, the storm was relentless. Explosions rumbled through the hull. Shields flared and cracked under the pressure. Fires broke out on lower decks, and damage reports flooded in. Shields at 40%. Engine 3 offline. We've lost half the missile bays. The crew fought desperately to keep the ship alive. Hands flew across controls, sparks rained from broken panels, sweat dripped from tense brows. Every second felt like the last. On the Eternal Blade, Admiral Vorthak leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. It falters. Press harder. Break it. The ball. Dominion forces closed in, forming a net around the human vessel. To them, victory was seconds away. But then, something unexpected happened. The warship stopped running. Its engines slowed. Its movement ceased. It turned its scarred hull directly toward the heart of the Zarkathi fleet. Its weapons powered up, glowing with fierce light. "They're standing their ground," a Zarkathi officer said, confusion in his voice. And then the human warship opened. Fire. Massive cannons roared, unleashing beams that cut straight through cruisers. Railguns spat projectiles at impossible speed, shredding fighters and frigates. Torpedoes burst out in streams, detonating inside enemy formations. It did not run. It did not hide. It fought, tooth and claw, like a beast backed into a corner on the human command deck. Arik's voice rang out. "Hold the line! Remember who we are! We do not bow! We do not break!" The crew answered with fire in their eyes. Every strike, every maneuver was no longer just survival. It was defiance. The Zarkathi pressed harder, but something began to change. For the first time, Dominion soldiers felt hesitation. They had faced many enemies before, but none that fought like this. Other civilizations begged for mercy when defeat was certain, but the humans did not beg. Even against overwhelming force, they fought with more fury, more fire, as if defeat itself was not an option. "What kind of species are these?" one commander whispered in fear. A ghost of doubt spread through the Dominion. Their numbers were vast, their weapons endless, yet a single warship still held against them. What would happen if humanity had more of these ships? What would happen if the whole species fought this way? Admiral Vorthak snarled, his pride burning hotter than his fear. "Enough! Bring in the dreadnoughts. We will smash this insect once and for all." The sky darkened as the largest Zarkathi war machines advanced. Their hulls blotted out the stars. Their cannons glowed with deadly fire. Each dreadnought carried the power to break a world. Together, they were unstoppable. On the human warship, alarms screamed louder than ever. The crew braced themselves. They knew what was coming. This was not just a battle. It was the final test of their will. Arik looked around at his crew. He saw the exhaustion in their faces, the pain in their eyes. But beneath it all, he saw something stronger. Determination. "Listen to me," he said, his voice firm. "They think we are weak. They think we will die quietly. But humanity does not die quietly. We fight until there is nothing left. And even then, we fight more." The crew's hands tightened on their controls. The warship's engines roared back to life. Weapons flared. And as the massive dreadnoughts opened fire, the lone human warship surged forward into the storm, proving to the galaxy that survival was not about numbers, but about will. The final stand. The void burned with light. The Zarkathi dreadnoughts advanced, their cannons glowing like suns about to erupt. Each one was larger than a city, armed with weapons that could tear planets apart. Together, they moved like an unstoppable wall of fire and steel. From the bridge of the Eternal Blade, Admiral Vorthak watched with pride. His voice was cold and certain. "This ends now. No human relic will stand before the full might of the Dominion." His officers cheered. They believed the battle was already won. But far across the battlefield, the lone human warship refused to retreat. Scarred, battered, and burning from earlier fights, it drifted forward, steady and unbroken. Its hull carried the weight of centuries, and its crew carried the weight of humanity's will. On the command deck, Captain Arik Dane stood with his crew. Alarms blared around them, sparks rained from broken panels, and smoke filled the air. Yet no one moved to abandon their posts. Their eyes burned with the same fire as their captain's. Arik spoke quietly, but his words cut through the chaos, like steel. "They think this is the end. They think we will kneel. But this ship was not built to kneel. It was built to fight until the last breath, until the last shot, until the last man." The crew nodded. Their fear was gone. What remained was resolve. The Zarkathi dreadnoughts opened fire. Beams of plasma, each wide enough to swallow cities, shot across space. Explosions ripped through the void as the human warship twisted, shields flaring under the storm. Armor peeled. "Away!" Metal screamed. Entire decks collapsed under the force. "Shields down to 20%, a technician cried. "We can't take another hit like that." Arik's voice was calm. "We will take it, and we will answer harder." The warship retaliated. Its main cannon roared, a beam of pure energy slicing through the dark. One dreadnought shuddered as the shot tore across its shields, then cracked its armor open. Fire spilled from its hull, and the massive vessel drifted broken into the abyss. Cheers erupted on the human bridge. But the victory was short-lived. 4 more dreadnoughts pressed forward, their combined fire shaking the very void. The human warship staggered. Systems flickered. For a moment it seemed the end had come. Then something deep within the vessel came alive. Ancient codes, locked away for centuries, activated. The ship's core hummed with a sound older than its crew. A weapon designed for humanity's darkest hour. Lights across the hull flared brighter than ever before, and energy surged through every system. The crew stared in awe as their consoles lit up with new options, weapons they had only seen in legends. "What is this?" the first officer whispered. Arik's eyes narrowed. "It's the last gift of those who came before us, a weapon built not for conquest, but for survival." He gave the order. "Activate it." The warship's hull split open, revealing hidden ports that had been sealed for decades. Energy gathered, swirling into a storm brighter than any star. The void trembled as the weapon powered up, a soundless scream of humanity's will echoing across space. The Zarkathi officers froze as their scanners lit with warnings. "Admiral, the human ship, it's charging something!" Vorthak snarled. "Fire everything! Destroy it before it releases!" But it was too late. The warship unleashed. Its hidden weapon, a sphere of white fire, erupted outward, expanding like a tidal wave. It cut through dreadnought shields as if they were paper, ripping apart armor, detonating engines, and tearing fleets into ruins. The blast rolled across the battlefield, erasing everything in its path. Zarkathi dreadnoughts, once symbols of fear, now burned like torches in the night. Fighters vanished in clouds of ash. Cruisers crumbled into fragments. The Dominion's unstoppable wall was shattered in one strike. Silence followed. The stars, once drowned by enemy fire, now shone clearly. Again, the void was filled only with drifting wreckage, glowing embers of a fleet that had believed itself eternal. On the bridge of the human warship, the crew sat in stunned silence. They had survived. Against 10 fleets, against dreadnoughts, against the arrogance of an empire, they still lived. Arik lowered his head, his voice quiet. "They will come again. And when they do, we will be here." His crew straightened, their pride unshakable. They were no longer just survivors. They were defenders of a species, a warning to the galaxy. On the broken eternal blade, Admiral Vorthak stared in disbelief at the destruction. His empire had never known defeat, but now he had seen it with his own eyes. One ship, one human warship, had destroyed fleets he believed invincible. Fear spread through his heart like poison, and deep inside, a terrible thought whispered to him, "If one ship can do this, what happens if humanity builds more?" The human warship floated silently among the wreckage, its hull burned, its shields gone, its systems exhausted, but it still stood. Like humanity itself, it was scarred, but unbroken. And as the silence of victory settled over the battlefield, one truth echoed across the stars. The Zarkathi Dominion had faced their first defeat, not from an empire, not from a fleet, but from the will of a single human warship. Silence over the stars. The battlefield was no longer alive with fire. The endless storm of weapons, explosions, and screams had faded into silence. Where once the Zarkathi fleets blotted out the stars, now only wreckage drifted, shattered dreadnoughts, broken cruisers, and burning fragments of fighters. Among the ruins, one ship remained. The lone human warship floated quietly, its hull scarred and scorched. Entire sections of its armor were torn open, and fires still burned in its lower decks. Yet it had survived. Against the greatest armada the Zarkathi Dominion had ever unleashed, it still stood. Inside, the crew sat at their stations in exhaustion. Their faces were pale, their uniforms torn, their hands blistered from hours of battle. But their eyes burned with pride. They had done what no one believed possible. On the command deck, Captain Arik Dane stood in silence, his gaze fixed on the stars beyond the wreckage. His voice, though quiet, carried the weight of history. "It is over. For now." The crew exchanged glances. They knew what he meant. The Dominion would not forget this defeat. They would regroup, rebuild, and one day return. But today belonged to humanity. Far away across the galaxy, whispers spread. Merchant ships carried the story. Survivors of the Zarkathi retreat spoke in fear. And soon, entire civilizations heard the tale of the battle, the tale of a single human warship that stood alone against fleets that had crushed empires. In hidden corners, rulers of small nations who once feared the Dominion now dared to hope. If one ship could do this, maybe the Dominion was not unstoppable after all. On the Zarkathi worlds, the reaction was different. Fear crept like poison through the halls of power. The Dominion had always been certain of their supremacy. But now, for the first time in their history, they had been defeated. And not by an empire, not by an alliance, by a single warship. Even Admiral Vorthak, once proud and unshaken, could not escape the truth. His fleets lay in ruins. His dreadnought burned. He stared into the void, haunted by the question that gnawed at him. If one ship could do this, what if humanity has more? The arrogance of the Dominion cracked that day, replaced by a new shadow: doubt. Inside the human warship, the silence was heavy. Damage crews rushed through corridors, sealing ruptures, carrying the wounded, and extinguishing fires. The ship had survived, but at a great cost. Many lay injured, some would never rise again. Arik walked among his crew, his hand resting on shoulders, his voice calm and steady. "You are not just survivors," he told them. "You are the proof that humanity endures. The galaxy will remember what happened here." In the mess hall, where silence usually ruled after battle, the crew sat together. No one celebrated loudly. There was no victory song, no cheer. Instead, there was quiet pride, the kind born not from triumph, but from sacrifice. One young officer whispered, "We were only one ship, and yet we stood." The others nodded. They knew the truth. It was not just weapons or technology that carried them through. It was willpower, the stubborn refusal to bow. As repairs continued, the ship drifted, in the wreckage alone in the dark. To passing eyes, it might have seemed like a ghost, scarred, silent, and watchful. And perhaps that was the point. The warship had become more than a machine. It was now a legend, a symbol carved into the memory of the galaxy. The Dominions. Enemies whispered its name with hope. The Dominion itself whispered it with fear. It was a reminder that even in the face of impossible odds, one act of defiance could shake empires. When the last fires burned out and the final systems came online, Arik returned to the command deck. His crew straightened, weary but ready. "Set course," he said. "Where to, Captain?" the first officer asked. Arik's gaze turned to the endless stars. His voice was steady, quiet, but filled with purpose. "Nowhere. We hold this ground. This ship is the line they will never cross. If they return, we will be waiting." The engines hummed softly, keeping the ship steady among the ruins. No triumphant march followed, no parade awaited them. Only silence. But in that silence was strength. The galaxy would tell the story in many ways. Some would call it the Battle of the Ghost Ship. Others would name it the first defeat of the Dominion. But to humanity, it was something simpler. It was the day they proved that no empire, no matter how endless, could break their will. The stars shone cold and distant, watching as the warship drifted in silence. The Dominion's roar had been silenced. The galaxy had changed forever, and in the darkness, the lone human warship waited, scarred, silent, unbroken.